Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. If you're just coming in, please be sure you sign in and grab a seat. So good morning, everyone. I am Anastasia Panagakos, and on behalf of CRC Anthropology Department, I would like to welcome you to Anthro Stories featuring Diana Malarchik. Anthro Stories is an occasional speaker series which highlights the academic, career, and personal journeys of anthropologists working and learning here in Northern California. Our goal in creating Anthro Stories is to give our students exposure to the varied and diverse perspectives found in anthropology, a discipline which studies the whole experience of what it means to be human, from present day to ancient societies, our biology and evolution, to our language and culture. Before we get started today, we do want to acknowledge the land currently occupied by Cosumnes River College as the traditional home of the Miwok and Nisenan people. These sovereign people have been caretakers of the area since time immemorial. The state of California is home to more than 110 federally recognized Indian tribes, representing the most diverse set of tribal nations anywhere in the United States. Despite centuries of genocide and occupation, the Miwok and Nisenan people continue as vibrant and resilient federally recognized tribes, bands, and rancherias. The waters of the Sacramento, American, and Cosumnes rivers have nourished Miwok and Nisenan tribal communities with cultural and dietary sustenance through time. Cosumnes of Cosumnes River derives from the Plains Miwok language, stemming from the words Kosumu, meaning salmon, and Umne, meaning the place of. It translates as the place of the salmon. Today, we celebrate our Miwok and Nisenan tribal neighbors as the ancestral stewards of this land and honor their sustained existence. It is with their blessing and continued guidance that Cosumnes River College seeks to provide an accessible, equitable, and principled institution of learning. Okay, before we get started today, a couple of housekeeping items. Please be sure to silence your cell phones, and also that photography and video recording is prohibited. We will be recording today's presentation, however, which will be available on CRC's YouTube channel, along with all previous Anthro Stories presentations. So if you do need to see it again, you can go back and see it on YouTube once that becomes available. If you're attending this presentation for extra credit or just for fun, please sign in at the back of the room. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Diana Malarchik, who is a PhD student in UC Davis's Department of Anthropology and also a registered professional archaeologist. So please help me in welcoming Diana. Welcome, Diana. So the way that we have conceived of Anthro Stories is actually kind of a three-part presentation. So we usually begin with kind of a little interview so that Diana can tell us a little bit about herself and why she got interested in anthropology. Then Diana's going to tell us about her research, which you can see up here on the screen, and then there'll be time at the end for questions. So if you have any questions while she's presenting, please feel free to jot them down, and we'll be sure that there's some time at the end. So again, Diana, welcome. I'm going to sit down here next to you, and if you could just tell us a little bit about your background, like where did you grow up, how did you get interested in anthropology, where you went to school, and all those good things.
The whole life story. Okay, so I grew up in a really small town called Yarrington in Nevada, more livestock than people. So so we'll go way back. So I come from a pretty big family. I'm one of five, typical middle child. I don't like sharing. And I really got into anthropology in high school, but I didn't know what it was yet. So when I was in 9th grade, we had to do one of those, like, what are you going to be when you grow up reports? And I had just read the book Timeline by Michael Crichton, and they're medieval archaeologists in the book. Read the book, don't watch the movie. The movie is trash, but it's got Gerard Butler in it, so I can't be. And I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, I want to study medieval history. I want to be a medieval archaeologist, like, done. And I kind of kept that in the back of my mind. And then when I was a senior, I took an anatomy class, and I was like, no, this, bones. Like, I'm so into this. And my professor, my teacher in high school, he was like, oh, you like biological anthropology. If you want to dig and you want to work with bones, that's what you want to do. And I was like, done, check, got it. So then, very small town, I went to school. I got into school at the University of Arizona, and I went there for orientation and had a full panic attack and meltdown. And my mom said I didn't have to go there, and I said thank you. So then I went to UNR, University of Nevada, Reno, only 2 hours from home, a little, far enough away that I felt like I was an adult, but still close enough I can go home on the weekend and not panic about being in such a big city. So I started my degree in anthropology, and then the panic continued, and no offense, I took a cultural anthropology class, and I hated it. I hated it so much. It was like the professor didn't teach in my learning style. His slides were blue with yellow writing, and I just couldn't handle that for some reason. And I was like, can't do it. I took a 300-level genetics class as a freshman. Why they let me sign up for it, I don't know. I got a D. I did not do well. And so I changed my major to education, and I was like, I'll just be a teacher, and then one day I'll figure out how to be an anthropologist. So got that degree, took a bunch of anthropology classes along the way. I still really liked it. Took a magic, witchcraft, and religion class, dabbled back in cultural, took a couple bio classes. I taught for a while, so I taught science, anatomy, history, kind of a little bit of everything. All of the grade levels. So although it's expired now, I have a teaching license from 7 to 12. So I used to teach at an all-boys juvenile delinquent residential charter school. So we would have kids who had gotten in trouble with the law, basically, and then they're kind of given a second chance to live somewhere else, learn a trade, get a GED or a high school diploma, and then they can graduate out of the program and kind of have a path back into civilian life. And I really liked that. I liked working with young kids, especially kids who had come from like troubled backgrounds and who just needed a big push. I'm pretty enthusiastic, so I kind of liked rubbing that positive energy off on them. I taught in Spain for a while, which was really cool. Definitely, if you guys can travel abroad or get a cultural exchange program, do it while you're young. It's very fun. And then I came back and I got my master's in anthropology at the University of Nevada, Reno. And I got in because I wrote my letter of intent about working with the Basques, who are the indigenous group of people that live in northern Spain and southern France. And someone there just happened to have been studying them, and they had some data, and they just kind of threw it at me, and I loved it. I was like, this is it. I found it. What I found was teeth. I know it sounds so dumb, but I love teeth. They're so interesting. They could tell you so much. You guys are going to learn a lot about teeth today. I know they just were like, okay, cool, you chew with them. Now I can cut them up, and I can tell you everything about you. So I really loved it. Then I graduated. We were still kind of in a recession back in the early 20-teens. So went back to teaching for a bit, and then I would work CRM, which is called Cultural Resource Management. So that's like professional archaeology in the summers, which paid off my student loans. Super great. And I got back into the ARC world, started dating someone, fell in love, followed him around a bit. We're married now, so it's cool. Then I worked archaeology there. I taught a little bit. We lived in Texas for a while. We moved back to California. And I got a full-time ARC job here for 3 years, and I decided, yep, I'm gonna go back to school. I want to be a professor. I miss working with students, and now I'm at the University of Davis. So that, in a nutshell, is the last 15 years of my life. Yeah.
So follow-up question for you. So you said that, so your bachelor's degree was not in anthropology. So how did you go from being, what was it in, and then how did you get a master's in anthro?
Yeah, so my bachelor's degree is in secondary education. I have a minor in Spanish. And then I think a lot of people think your master's has to be what your bachelor's is in. Oh, no. You just have to find someone who wants to work with you. That's how grad school works. So if you can convince someone that you're a hard worker and you like what you do and you're going to be a resource to them, they'll take you in for grad school. So I just funneled all of my positive Pollyanna energy into a letter of intent that was like, I want to do this, I love doing this, accept me. and I got lucky and one person did. So that's how I wound up back in the world of anthropology. But I did take classes throughout my undergrad, so I didn't stray too far.
So it's interesting because I think for a lot of our students and for many of us, our path was not linear getting to where we are career-wise. So when you think back on it, were there times where you maybe felt like you weren't going to make it, or like you weren't in the right place? And how do you go from realizing you're not doing the thing that you love to do to then moving on to something that is more fulfilling?
Oh, for sure. So I luckily got into that master's program. It lasted a couple years, I think 2.5 years. I applied for a PhD program because I knew this is what I wanted to do. And it is very expensive to apply for PhD programs. I think it's getting a little better now. But I applied to 4 schools, and I didn't get into any of them. And I was crushed. I was devastated. At the same time, my mom was dealing with some health issues. She had just gotten diagnosed with Parkinson's. She's doing really good now. But so I was like, maybe this is a sign. I'll stay with my mom a little bit, help her get her health better under control. We did. She's doing great. I applied again, and I didn't get into any schools again. And again, like, just the devastation of, like, nobody wants you, like, I'm the problem, it's me, just, like, crushing devastation. So then took some years off, studied worked as an archaeologist, got more and more experience. I took some classes. I went to Texas State, and I took a forensic workshop where they, like, teach you how to do forensic recoveries. I've actually done forensic work in California. I worked in Paradise after the big fire there and helped recover people who were lost in that tragedy. And I just really built up my resume. And I just reminded myself through work and experience that I do love what I do. And it doesn't matter if I don't get a PhD because I can always work CRM, and I like doing that. So even if I didn't reach that goal, I was still happy and still fulfilled by my job. And then I applied again, and I got into 2 schools, and it was amazing. And then I made the schools battle for me and give me money, and it worked. So, yeah, definitely I am a poster child for, like, if you don't succeed, try again. And then if you don't succeed, try again. And then just, like, battering ram down that door because know what you want and go for what you want.
Thank you. Well, it's inspiring to hear, and so now we have exciting things to talk about. I know everyone's probably wondering about what kind of work Diana actually does, and so without further ado, why don't we can move over to the podium and get you set up for that, and if you have questions, we'll take them at the end.
Okay, cool. I'm tall. Okay. Cool. Okay, so I get to talk to you guys about my research. So I'm currently just entering my 3rd year at UC Davis. And so the way doctoral programs work is your first 2 years you take classes, and then you kind of earn a master's along the way. So now I have 2, so that's pretty cool. But now in my 3rd year, I get to take, like, a really big test. I don't care about that. But I get to actually just focus only on my research, which is really exciting. So a little bit about my research is I work in San Francisco, in historic San Francisco, so you guys will learn a little bit about that. And I work with human skeletal remains, so I do want to just kind of, like, put a caveat out before I begin that my presentation does have human remains in it. I don't pick these photos just because I think they're cool looking or for the shock value. I sit and think about what would these individuals want, would they be okay with this? So I do only have pictures of dental remains to kind of lower the, I don't know, the kind of use of human skeletal remains as kind of like a shock and awe value. So I do think about it judiciously and only pick specific photos. But if that bothers anyone, you can leave. I'm not going to feel bad about that. I just know that that's kind of a sensitive issue for a lot of people, and I want to make sure everyone knows that going in. Okay, so first, what is archaeology? So archaeology in a nutshell, in your textbook, is just the study of the past human cultures, past human behaviors through material remains. And that can mean a lot of things. You could be a prehistoric archaeologist and focus on cultures before written record. You could be a historic archaeologist and focus on cultures after written record. You can kind of dabble in both worlds, which is a little bit of what I do. Or you could be a bioarchaeologist, who is an archaeologist who specializes in the human skeleton, basically, the humans as a biological organism. So I think often when we think of archaeology, we think of archaeology in the media, right? We have bones. It's like everyone's example. Whenever I tell people what I do, they're always like, oh, so like bones? I'm like, yeah, I guess, okay, a little bit. I will say DNA does not come back in hours. I am still waiting on isotope and protein results, and it's been months. So I wish. That is the dream. And then, of course, we have Indiana Jones. He is a perfect representation of archaeology because of the fact that we're all beautiful, we're all gorgeous, we all look like movie stars, 100%. We all find amazing artifacts, but we don't blow them up. So that's kind of a difference. We also punch Nazis. That's a thing we take classes on it. But it's not quite that. So what is archaeology like in reality? This is archaeology. This is a photo I took at a construction site where I was working as an archaeological monitor. So what that means is part of contract archaeology, or like professional archaeology, is I go to construction sites and I watch them dig, and if they hit anything, be it projectile points, cultural remains, pottery, or human remains, which is my specialty, I can get them to stop, I can collect things and kind of get things going back again. Because we all understand we live on native land, but we still need things like housing and construction work, so they kind of work hand in hand. This is not a good way to start your day as an archaeologist when it is 7 in the morning and it is 42 degrees outside in July because I was in the bay, and you walk up to the bathrooms and it's so windy that they fell over. So I just didn't go to the bathroom that day. But that's not only what archaeology is. Here, let me... Archaeology is a lot of things. I wear lots of hats. I have worked, this is like a really young photo of me 10 years ago. My very first dig site, I worked in Italy at a historic cemetery. So that's me holding dental remains. Again, I'm telling you, teeth. I present at conferences. I work in labs, extracting proteins from dental enamel. I am not drinking a beer, but in fact, I recovered a complete beer bottle here in California from El Salvador that was over 120 years old. I did that this summer. It was very exciting, and it was still full of stuff, and it stunk. So when you take out a beer bottle, be careful, don't spill it on yourself, because there's probably still beer in it. And then another cool thing about being an archaeologist is getting to tell people you're an archaeologist. So I was just at a jewelry shop getting my wedding ring cleaned, and I mentioned to the guy that I'm an archaeologist, and he went, "Do you want to see a mastodon mandible?" So that's me holding a 13,000-year-old mastodon mandible. So it pays to be an archaeologist because we get to touch cool stuff. So yes, Indiana Jones and bones, they represent archaeology, but really what we do is a little bit of everything. So I specifically focus on the bioarchaeology of children. So I, as a bioarchaeologist, study human remains, specifically dentition, to understand life history. So life history is a theoretical approach, don't fall asleep yet, where we look at human life as individuals and as a species through an evolutionary lens. So how long does it take a child to grow and develop? How long are they breastfeeding for? What is their health like in the past? Does this change between populations? Does this change over time? What are the factors causing this change? So looking at historic San Francisco, I'm trying to really look at life events, particularly life events in childhood, that differ from populations in the past or our modern populations. A lot of that also involves looking at health of children, health of adults. It all kind of plays together. I'll go through it in a second, but I look at heavy metal exposure, and I look at immunosuppressed proteins sometimes. I don't do that a ton. It's a little out of my science league to understand health. And I do it all within about 80 years of time within historic San Francisco. And the cool thing about being a bioarchaeologist and working in historic San Francisco is that I can take archaeological data, human skeletal remains, mortuary remains, grave goods, things like that, and apply them with historic records. So I kind of walk the line. I walk lots of lines. So I'm kind of between archaeology and biological anthropology, and I'm also kind of between archaeology and history. So they all interlap and overlap each other, which makes for a much better understanding of what things were like in the past. So historic San Francisco is at a time when in America, particularly in California, where we were getting lots of ethnic diversity. So I have individuals that date back to 1850, so right after the gold rush. So we see this big boom of immigration, and that leads to ethnic diversity. We're getting people from all over the world, from China, from South America, from the East Coast of the United States, immigrating to California. It also leads to economic diversity. So I have people in my samples who were from higher socioeconomic groups, so rich people, and then I also have everyday people, or I have poor people. People were coming to California to make a better life. The same reason people immigrate today, right? They're trying to better their circumstances for their children. And a lot of that can also reflect on their own childhood. So looking at the childhood of immigrants who came in can kind of help me understand what their children's childhood might have been like as well. So these are two photos, historic photos, which are very hard to find. They're not very common. So future archaeologists are gonna love us because we all like take pictures of our food and put it on Instagram. So we're making it really easy on archaeologists in 100 years. I don't have a lot of photographs to work with. So we see here where we have black and white miners mining together. We have Chinese gold miners, both from the early 1850s, all moving into California, which before this time didn't have a large ethnically and economically diverse group of people. It was lots of Native Americans still, of course, and then Spanish colonialists slowly kind of moving out at about this time. Okay. I'm gonna bore you guys about teeth now. I apologize in advance, but I'm gonna tell you why they're so cool. So teeth are special in the human skeletal system, right? So think of your body, your human skeleton is covered in muscle and skin, and you can't see it. Your teeth are not bones, but they're a part of your skeletal system. They're the only part of your skeletal system that directly interacts with your everyday environment. So not only can I see changes on your teeth, people culturally modify their teeth, they'll file them down, they'll put like little jewels in it. We wear braces, that's a cultural modification to understand societal norms around beauty, right? Having straight teeth is what people want. So looking at all of that, I can look at things that represent behaviors in society. Also, teeth, unlike bone, are 98% inorganic. So what that means is they last for a long time. So I'm gonna go full bio here. So during the fossilization process, the reason bones become fossils is because the environment around them will leach out that organic and fill it in with inorganic. And sometimes it doesn't work, and that person or animal or whatever will just decompose, and then they're not there anymore. Teeth, they're 98% inorganic already. They only got 2% to go, so they stick around for a long time. That's why if you guys are like in an intro into bio, as you get into the fossil record, you'll start seeing Sahelanthropus, Australopithecines, all of those guys, lots of teeth. You just get jawbones, mandibles, just chilling because teeth don't go anywhere. So that means that if you know about teeth, you can study anything in biological anthropology or archaeology if you want to study about human skeletal remains because they're everywhere. Another great thing about teeth is that they form in really specific ways. So like a tree, your teeth grow in rings. So I got a picture here. I want to not break this. Okay, look at me go. So up at the very top there, just that little tiny nudge, that's the very start of your tooth growing. And then as you see, it gets a little bit bigger, till we have your crown. So this is the part of the tooth you can see in your own mouth. And then as you go along, we grow our roots, which are what are in our bone. And they grow in predictable times. So I can look at the elements that make up that tooth and make up the section of that tooth and know what you were eating as that part of your tooth was growing. Because you are literally what you eat. What you consume becomes your body, right? You eat, I don't know, a cheeseburger. The carbon and the nitrogen in that become your bones, and they become your teeth. So being able to have teeth last a long time and being able to have teeth that grow in predictable patterns, which is all teeth in all animals, not just humans, makes it really great for archaeologists, particularly dental ones. Okay, so how do I look at teeth and the elements that make up teeth to understand what that person ate? So when I process human dental remains, I like do a bunch of crazy stuff. I like drill off the enamel, and then I drill off the cementum, and then I literally bake them in an oven for a little bit, and then I put them in hydrochloric acid, and it makes me feel real smart and like a big scientist because I wear a lab coat. But then I extract collagen. So collagen is kind of like the glue that holds you together. You have collagen pretty much everywhere. So I can extract the collagen, and I will send it off to a lab where people are smarter than me, and then they'll send me back some numbers, and I'll plot those numbers. And what those numbers are carbon and nitrogen. So carbon tells me what kind of plants you're eating. If you're eating C3 plants and C4 plants, which those are based off of like what kind of photosynthesis they make or they use. You don't have to worry about carbon. Don't tell my advisor, I don't super care about carbon. I care about nitrogen. So nitrogen tells me where you are in the trophic level. So trophic means consumer. So what level of consumption are you? So if you're a vegetarian, you're on a lower trophic level. If you're a vegan, you're probably even lower because you're not eating eggs or cheese. And then if you're an omnivore, you're going to be higher. So we can, I got a little close, sorry. We could see here that my herbivores are lower on nitrogen, so nitrogen's on the side. And then as you go up in consumption, so deer eats the grass, fox eats the deer, wolf eats the fox, that nitrogen is going up from 5 to 10. It gets even better with marine stuff because a little tiny fish is eaten by a little bit bigger fish, who's eaten by a bigger fish, who's eaten by a bigger fish, who's eaten by a shark. This is also why you don't eat big fish all the time nowadays, because that's how mercury accumulates. Same with nitrogen, same kind of idea. So I can then take your tooth. Honestly, I could do this with any of you. If you guys gave me your first molar, which is like the big tooth in the back, I could process it, get it ready. I get it all baked in fancy stuff, and then I cut it into what we call serial sections. So you can see I have my tooth sideways, and then it's really small, but you can see where it says like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So I get the tooth all prepped, and then I cut it into millimeter pieces, and then that's where I extract the collagen. So that then gives me back the numbers after I send it to another lab of how much nitrogen is in each section. And then I can plot all of my points in Excel and create a little timeline like before, or like below. So if you see below, the little dots on the side, it kind of starts high, and then it gently, kind of like a roller coaster, leans down. So what that tells me is that person was breastfeeding because they have a high nitrogen, because humans were apex predators. We're at the top of the food chain. But babies, who do they eat off of? Their moms. So they have higher than human nitrogen levels because technically they're eating humans. They're eating a human product, breast milk. Cannibals would probably have the same, much less socially acceptable. So I can see where they're breastfeeding, and then slowly where mom starts weaning the child, so they start giving them less and less breast milk and introducing adult foods. Normally like cereals and grains at first, and then you work your way up. And then I can figure out when that breast milk stopped, so it'll be at the lowest point, so right around the age of 4, which is normal. That's a good weaning timeline. Remember, I'm working with people who don't have formula. And then also because the way your tooth grows, your first molar is growing until you're about 8 or 9, maybe 10 if you have really long teeth. So I can also see what you're eating as a child. So I can understand your weaning, and then I can understand your childhood diet. And why is this important? Breast milk is evolutionarily perfect. It is perfect for babies. It is high calories. It's a ton of calories. It's sterile. There's no bacteria in it that will hurt the baby. And it also has mom's antibodies and immune supporting like proteins and cells in it, right? So that's what helps keep that baby from getting sick and make sure they have plenty of calories. It's not introducing bacteria like it would be if you gave a baby water. Breast milk is great. Not everyone can breastfeed for lots of reasons. It could be your milk doesn't come in, your baby doesn't latch. It could be you don't have enough calories yourself to make breast milk. Or it could be, for historic reasons, you're breastfeeding someone else's child because they're paying you. It's called being a wet nurse. So we see that in historic samples a lot. So that is why when I go through my samples, I'll talk about class differences, because not only do poor women already have problems getting in enough calories that they need, society has further marginalized them or like subjugated them because upper class women can just pay them to breastfeed if they're not able to, or if it wasn't like fashionable at the time, which weirdly is a thing before formula. Like, I don't know, blows my mind a little. Another thing, I don't just look at the inside of the tooth, I look at the whole tooth. So that enamel, so the outside of the tooth that you can see, the white part, I will drill that off because that's inorganic, I don't need that. And I will run it through a mass spec, which is like a big whirly machine I don't use and I don't know how to use, I just pay people and they're my best friends. And I can look at what kind of metals you were exposed to. So just like the inside, it's growing at the same time. So I can see what metals you were introduced or were in your diet during the time that tooth was growing. So for first molars, it is from about like birth to 6, give or take, because it takes longer for your roots to grow, so they don't grow as long as roots. And then for third molars, it's from like 9 to 14. So if I look at the metal exposure in both of these, I could basically map what your metal exposure was like in your whole childhood. So why is that important? Things we know now we didn't know then. If you're exposed to lead as a child, that stops cognitive development and it changes the way your emotions are processed in your brain. So you become angrier, you become quick-tempered, you don't know how to take in and process emotions. So imagine yourself pissed off, you think everyone's out to get you, and now you're trying to fit into a society where we don't understand what mental health is. It was the 1850s. Now add on top of that, if you're not a white male who's rich, life is going to be a little hard for you. And so I look at this to look at California particularly, to understand what the immigrants coming into California and what the class systems were like, particularly when looking at diet and metal intake. And we'll talk about it in a bit, but metal was everywhere. It was in all of their medicine. Wasn't good. Okay, now we're set up. So we know how teeth work. We know how I use them. Everyone in here is thinking to themselves, I'm going to be a dental anthropologist. I can see it in your eyes. You'll all wear teeth earrings like I have on. It's perfect and beautiful. So I study historic San Francisco. And so has everyone here been to San Francisco? Cool, right? It's fun. It's awesome. Most of you have probably been standing on top of some of these cemeteries. So at the time, San Francisco had anywhere between like 2 or 3 up to 5 cemeteries all active at the same time. So the first cemetery in San Francisco was called Yerba Buena Cemetery, which also used to be the historic name of San Francisco, was Yerba Buena. It means good herbs, so something must have grown there. That was nice. So that is where City Hall is right now, and where the Asian Art Museum is. So years ago, archaeological company was monitoring, so like when we watch construction, and they were renovating, I believe, the parking lot at the Asian Art Museum, literally across the street from City Hall, and oopsie doopsie, they found burials, because it used to be a cemetery, and it got moved in the 1850s, but they were bad at it, and they left a lot of people behind, because records weren't that great, they didn't have ground-penetrating radar, they just forgot. Human memory is really short. We kind of forget a lot of things a lot sooner than we should. So at the time it was closed, most people were taken to Golden Gate City Cemetery, or just City Cemetery for short, but not everybody. So the people I study are those who were left behind. They got forgotten. So that's how they come into my lab, is that I get to look at these people who were left behind and try to remember them and try to tell their story as much as I can with the remains that we have left behind. So then after Yerba Buena closed down, they opened up what would be called the Big Four. So it took a while for the Big Four to really kind of all work out where they were, so they overlap depending on what time in history I'm looking at. So the Big Four are Calvary, Laurel Hill, Masonic, and Oddfellows. And they run from about 1855 until the early 1900s. They all have kind of different closing points. And they all kind of span all walks of life. So Oddfellows is a part of like an order you had to belong to, so more rich people live there. I have a picture of a gold-filled tooth I'll show you in a minute from Oddfellows. Masonic is the same. I'm getting people from Masonic to kind of add to it. And then Calvary and Laurel Hill was more of a mix, probably more middle class, kind of lower socioeconomic classes as well. That is Richmond. There's no cemeteries there now, right? People build their houses there. So when they're building these houses or doing renovations in this, honestly, like in the street, like just checking on a pipe or replacing a pipe, we find burials, because it's hard to move all these cemeteries. I have pictures of them in a sec. So that's how these people come to me. And then city up there is where we have beautiful golf courses now. Because in the 1930s, people in San Francisco were tired of having these completely full, pretty much, cemeteries taking up space. So they all got moved to Colma. So that's why there were more dead people than living in Colma, is because they all got moved there. And then when you move people, the 1930s, people got forgotten. It could be worse. So I also have samples, have individuals from the Santa Clara Valley Medical Center, which is a hospital still in operation in San Jose, and they had a historic cemetery there. So if you were in a hospital and you passed away and no one came to claim you, or you couldn't pay to be buried there, they buried you in the hospital cemetery. They had clergymen on staff who would give you your last rites or whatever your specific religion called for, and they would bury you. In the 1930s, again, a lot of this happens in the 30s. Everyone was just depressed, get it? Like history teacher, got it. So they literally forgot about an entire cemetery, and it just, in 1935, was on their hospital map, and in 1937 wasn't. And then in 2012, putting in a parking lot, they found 1,000 people. And there are more. There are way more. They're not done excavating that one for sure. So all of these individuals represent people from the Santa Clara Valley Medical Center, and I have currently 11 of them, but I'm going to get 45 more soon, so fingers crossed I get them. And they represent a lot of the people I want to be studying, like people who are immigrating here, that lower class, people whose stories weren't told in historical records, women, children. People don't write down stuff about their everyday life. They didn't have TikTok. Sure, they didn't. Honestly, our generation, archaeologists are going to love it because we record everything. They're so, especially cultural anthropologists, like field day. They're so into it. So unfortunately, this cemetery was just completely forgotten, which bad for the people, but good for archaeologists. I have a direct, almost literal snapshot photograph of what health would have been like in the past because of these people. So here are historic photographs. So this is 1934 and I think 1935. And so that one I think looks pretty orderly, right? These are, oh, I forget which one's which. I should have written it. One's Oddfellows and one is Calvary. So these are in the Big Four. These are in the Richmond district of San Francisco. And it looks kind of orderly. It looks like they're out there digging. There are a lot of people. Like, of course you're gonna miss people. It's probably not as orderly as that looks. This seems much like a better representation of them just kind of like getting in there. A lot of this was actually paid for by the New Deal because people needed jobs. It was in the middle of the Depression, so they got federal money to move these cemeteries, to build more housing, and to kind of renovate and innovate what we now know of as downtown San Francisco. So these are like 6 blocks, 7, 8 blocks northeast of Golden Gate Park. So they're like downtown. So when you're in San Francisco, you can actually go to Buena Vista Park. Okay, here's a fun fact. See, I told you I was going to talk a lot. So the government only paid to move the people, to move the burials, to move the bodies, or the coffins. They did not pay to move the gravestones, the headstones. So if you wanted your family's headstone moved, you had to pay for it. It's about $25, which back then would have been quite a lot of money. And it's 20 kilometers, which is what, like 11 miles, to get it from San Francisco to Colma. Not a lot of people did that. So if you go to Buena Vista Park, you can see the gutters and the sidewalks are made out of old headstones, which is really cool. I mean, I like it. I think humans are really innovative. We don't tend to let things go to waste. We like to reuse stuff. So even in a time of like literal Great Depression, we're reusing things to make it better. So if you ever want to see like a little snapshot back into what headstones of the 1850s looked like, go to Buena Vista Park. It's pretty cool. They're broken into pieces, but you can still see it'll be like died 18 something, and then another piece will be like Edward Mick, and it'll be all cut off. It's pretty interesting. Okay, so who do I have? So I told you about all the cemeteries, and so these are the people I have. So that's me collecting samples up in Chico. So the individuals from the Santa Clara Valley Medical Center are currently living in Chico. So this is the glamorous life of an archaeologist. So those white office boxes, every 2 of them is one person. And these pictures do not do it justice. We were in a very small room, and this little space you can see where we're working was the only space not filled with boxes. So there was probably like 600-700 people in there, and then they had the others in a different box. And the reason we're doing a lot of this work too is state law, I mean, just because it's the way it is, or we have more and more people, is that when we find burials and they're unclaimed, we cremate them, and then the state pays for them to be buried. So they are, through Dr. Bartlink, who is the guy in the plaid right there, he got a deal where we can have this collection for 10 years, so we can try to learn as much about the past while we have the chance. Okay, so good and bad things. So teeth are great, we all know, but a lot of the people, particularly from like Yerba Buena or City Cemetery, because those were more aimed, they're called indigent burial grounds, so you didn't have to pay, so it's more aimed for lower socioeconomic classes. They were buried in redwood coffins. Super cheap. At the time, they were cutting down redwoods like it was going out of business. Wood was everywhere. But redwood is an acidic wood, so it like eats away your bones, because bones are organic. So sometimes this is all I have left of a person. So here's an individual's burial 3. So it is their upper dentition on the top, and then their lower dentition with what was left of their mandible. So, I mean, great if you're trying to get turnover in a cemetery. It's good for them, but it leaves very little. So this is why teeth are cool, because even when there's nothing left of a person, I can still tell you all about your childhood. I can tell you when this person stopped breastfeeding, and I will. I think I have it on a slide. I could tell you what kind of metal they were exposed to. And because of that, I can also tell you about their mom. I could tell you what she went through while she was breastfeeding her child. So teeth are great. I have city cemetery, a little bit better preservation. So you can see I have full bones here. But again, these people were moved. Also, they're often found during construction. So like literal bulldozers go through burials, and then the often quite angry and burly construction men get very freaked out until I come over and calm them down, and I go, it's okay, it's just a historic burial. Like, you go take a coffee break, go for a walk, I'll dig them up, it's fine. So these guys represent a little bit later. We got 1870 to 1900. And then my last one, these guys come from Oddfellow, and they are higher socioeconomic classes. So here's the occlusal surface, so the top of your teeth. And I know it's kind of hard to see, but it kind of looks like bubbly yuck in the middle of it. So when I sectioned the tooth, they had a gold filling. So I'm also going to try to take that gold out and, like, I don't know, see if I could see stuff in it. I don't know, I got to read about it if anyone does that. But so this person definitely had enough money to put gold in their mouth, which is pretty cool. Like, it definitely tells me that they had expendable income. Okay. So in archaeology, particularly bioarchaeology, we have a thing called the osteological paradox. So it just basically means like what problems we have to deal with because we only look at bones. So when you look at childhood archaeology, it can go 2 ways. So either you're only looking at children's skeletons, which only tells you about kids that did not make it to adulthood. I only look at dentition, so I am only looking at people who made it to adulthood and understanding their childhood, which means I'm not understanding the kids who didn't make it, which was a lot. Mortality rates for kids under 5, I have a little graph, is about 40 to 50%. So I'm missing half of my demographic. So the way I get over that is where history comes in. So take your history classes, pay attention to them. They're important if you want to be historical archaeologists. So this is an example of a historic death record. This is cursive. I know nobody uses that anymore. That's what cursive looks like. And it tells me tons. I have the date that this person died, their age, their sex, their year, sometimes to the day, what their occupation was sometimes. So like laborer, fisherman, jeweler, sailor, housewife, love it. I have, where they were born, China, Ireland, Italy, San Francisco, St. John's, Maryland, I think that says, Coloma, Mexico. I mean, all over the place. I have, where they died, and then I have their cause of death. So I can use these causes of death to understand how kids were dying, because that will give me a more full picture of childhood in the past. So the ones I have highlighted are particular diseases that come along with a lack of breastfeeding in the past. So when you can't breastfeed, what do you do? Anything you can. So what these moms would do is they would make a thing called pap, and pap is when you take a piece of bread and you soak it in milk until it becomes like liquid bread, and then you feed that to your kid. Well, if you don't have milk, what do you use? Because you don't have milk. You use water. And at least the kid's getting something, right? But now your water has cholera in it. So now your kid has cholera. Or you're using what's called a pap boat, which is kind of like a gravy boat, but a little smaller and more enclosed, which are really hard to clean. And so it's like a little infant bottle. So they're dirty infant bottles with dirty water with bread in it. That is a lot of bacteria you're introducing into that kid's diet. And so I can understand that maybe, I can't say for certain, that some of the diseases I see are perhaps because these kids didn't have breast milk or were weaned really early. So the top one says general debility, so it's just what we would say failure to thrive. Inanition are the next two red boxes. That also is like failure to thrive, undernourishment, and then inflammation of bowels, which is probably like a viral infection or a bacterial infection of that kiddos. And then when I look, all of those I have, one of them was 1, and then down here, one was 2 weeks old, one was a month, and one was 8 months old. So then I can also kind of understand at what age is this happening. So 8 months old, maybe they were just trying to wean them a little too early. I know some of this is a bummer, sorry. So what do I do with all of those? I sit in my dark office in my uncomfortable chair and I look at death records for like 9 hours. And then I put it into a program I hate called R. I've never cried more in my life than taking a class in R. But do it, learn it, it's great. And I can make charts like this. So this is the year 1866, so kind of in the middle of when all my cemeteries are. And I can look at distributions by both sex and age for death. So you can see that my first little box, it's 0 to 5, and I have, I think it's around like 1,400 kiddos under the age of 5 dying. So for this year, the ones that were recorded, because honestly, a lot of them probably weren't recorded, about 40, I think it's about 43%, so about 40 to 50% of children under the age of 5 are dying. And that is going to be due to poor diet or, to be honest, diseases that we now have vaccines for. So this is going to be my break in here for a PSA. Please vaccinate your children, because if you ever want to just come sit in my office and look at death records with me and be sad that all of these kids die of diphtheria and whooping cough and the measles, I will be happy to bum you out so that you'll vaccinate your kids. Please do it. It's great. Okay, the more you know. I can also look at causes of death. So again, bummer, kids under 5, and I am looking at causes of death. So stillborn or premature birth, that makes sense. They did not have the prenatal care that we have today, so that's going to be a big chunk of it. And then I also have what I would call like gastrointestinal diseases. So cholera, dysentery, gastroenteritis, as well as marasmus and inanition over here. Those are failure to thrive. That's what we would call it now. And all of that is probably could be in conjunction with them eating things that aren't breast milk. And then also you have like diphtheria, we have a vaccine for that. Tuberculosis, we have antibiotics for that. Croup and pertussis, we have vaccines for that. Do you see why I get on about vaccines? They're great. Okay. So now that I kind of have a historical context, I can look at my data. I know it's been a lot, but now we're finally there. So these are actual individuals. So on the, what is it for you guys? Your left, the orange squares and the blue triangles are native Ohlone. So they're the native population that lives in San Francisco. And I worked with them on other projects, and they let me use these as like a representation. So we can see lead is on my x-axis, and mercury is on my y. So I'm comparing how much lead they have versus how much mercury they have. And already you can see that the native population, they don't have that much. There's that one weird guy, and I don't know what he's doing, but he's got a lot of lead. And then all of my circles are historic. That's a lot of lead. But then the other thing is, this is on a logarithmic scale. So it's not saying, oh, he has 10 more like milligrams of lead. No, he has 10 times. So some of them have 1,000 times more lead than native populations would have in this area. So they're not getting it from the water. They're getting it from something. And then mercury is even worse, like 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times more. So think about how much you guys know about lead and mercury and how bad they are, and now you have 1,000 times more. And the reason they do is because of, I put it in quotes, medicine. So historic medicine, and again, like, think of the context. They were trying. They didn't know. Was full of this stuff. This is the cure-all culture, the patent medicine kind of realm. So here are just some examples. And yes, that does say cocaine toothache drops. So we used to give little kids who were teething Coke. Fun. It'll make your mouth go numb. That's why they did it. Cocaine is a what is it, antiseptic or whatever it just makes it go numb. So that's why they did it. But then you have a 3-year-old on Coke. Nuts. They have like tooth powders for children cutting teeth, or keep baby happy with Finnegan's children powders. These powders were full of anything and everything. They don't have ingredient lists. We didn't have the FDA. So you're just a mom struggling with a sick kid who probably has cholera, and you're doing anything. This is also where we start to see kids as consumers. Kids are being, or I guess parents are being advertised to buy things specifically for their kids. So now the idea of children's roles in the past is also changing. Okay. So that's me looking at metal and kind of saying how crazy it is. This is examples of individuals for my city cemetery, so like 1870, 1880s, and their weaning patterns. So these guys are actually pretty good. We see that slow roller coaster decline, pretty good. They stop breast milk at around 4. Again, perfect, normal, that's what we want. You should be breastfeeding until about 4 if you don't have formula. We also see people stopping breastfeeding at 1. Not as great. You're going to introduce more bacteria, more opportunities for this kid to get sick and not have that immune supporting breast milk. We also see people not breastfeeding at all. They shouldn't have made it to adulthood, but they did. So they have no weaning signature at all. You can see it's like a reverse roller coaster, like slowly building up and kind of all over the place. This is something we don't see in honestly, any other society that I have looked at weaning in. Like, until we get to industrialization and women start working, they breastfeed their kids. So this change in women's roles and us being used as part of the workforce affects everybody in the family. It affects the women, it affects their children, and then their children's health for the rest of your life. Because how sick you are as a kid, it affects how sick you're going to be for the rest of your life. If you don't have a good immune system as a kid, you might not have a good one as an adult. So what can I tell about all this stuff? So kind of going back to the beginning. So not only can I see things about these individuals who were kind of forgotten and give them back some of their memory to our running memory at the moment, but I can learn about the life history of marginalized groups. I'm looking at poor people, I'm looking at immigrants, I'm looking at basically not white males, which are often all we read about in historical documentation. So I'm learning more about their childhood, I'm learning more about their weaning patterns, but I'm also learning about the resiliency of those parents. To have a kid who wasn't breastfed, who was able to make it to adulthood, that's a lot of work. That's parents making PAP, that's parents being up while their kid probably has cholera, that's them nursing them through cholera. There's no cure for cholera now. It's like you just care someone through it. You give them electrolytes and like an IV bag, which they didn't have. So they just had to get a colicky, cholera baby through this. That's a lot of resilience. Those are hardworking parents. And those are hardworking parents that the historical records don't talk about. And then I think also this shows us how children are viewed in the past. We've all kind of heard that like kids are seen but not heard, or kids are not seen and not heard. They're just kind of put in another room and not talked about. That's how a lot of historical documentation in the 1850s in California was. So moving into seeing advertisements and heavy metal exposure in children tells us, hey, they're consumers of this medicine. Their parents are being advertised to, as well as some of those dots are from third molars, so that'd be like 9, 10, 11. Maybe they were working in lead factories or smelting work. So I can kind of parse through and understand kids as consumers and kids as workers. I mean, think Charles Dickens, right? Like the very Oliver Twist workhouse. That's a real thing a lot of these kids lived through. And they made it to adulthood. It is a very difficult thing to do. Throughout human history, most of us didn't make it to adulthood. So it's something we need to remember. Okay, thank you very much. So these are all the people who helped me get to where I am, and thank you guys for listening.
Thank you so much, Diana, for your informative talk. And originally we had invited you because October is California Archaeology Month. And then I only just realized as you were going through your presentation how close it is to Halloween and what a great topic to be talking about. So we do have a few minutes. And if anyone would like to pose a question, please raise your hand. And we'll start on this side of the room. Go ahead.
Oh, for like, okay, so why mortality rates are higher for men than females. So are you talking about when they're kids or in the middle? Because I could do both. So some of it is that I know you think like, oh, it's a 50-50 shot of being a male or a female. It is actually a little bit more. So our birth rates are about 52 to 53% male versus female. So some of it is just an overrepresentation of males that are born. Some of it also could just be girls tend to stay with mom. We see that a lot in prehistoric societies that have sex-specific tasks. So if a little girl is near her mom, maybe she just got breastfed a little bit more. And then in the middle, though, I don't know if you also noticed there are higher male. No offense to all the guys, that's because you guys make stupid decisions while trying to get a girlfriend. And you die, and we see that throughout history. So you do dumb stuff to impress us, and then you die. Sorry about it. Yes. What is my favorite tooth, basically? It's a lower first molar. I love them, both because they're square, they're easy to side, they're really easy, but they tell me the most information. Yeah, good question. Okay, so when I find human remains, can I match it with people? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes I'm legally not allowed to, depending on the collection I'm working with. But my advisor actually worked with a set of children remains from California that were found in someone's backyard doing renovation. And he found out when that little girl died, she was about 3, and like all the kind of stuff I told you about, but then he found out who she was, and he found her great nephew who, like, sad story, right? Little girl, or a little kid died. But a good thing is that guy had never known that side of the family, so he got to reconnect with them, which was like a really cool thing. Oh, he did. Yeah. Her name was Edith Cook. It's one of my favorite articles. Point of making teeth. Okay, so I put teeth in hydrochloric acid to remove like organic contaminant or to demineralize the teeth. Then I put it in NaOH to remove humic contaminants, so anything from the soil. And then I have to bake out the collagen in the teeth in pH 3 water. So I have to suck it out of the teeth, and then I freeze dry it, and no joke, I make little human cotton candy. And then I swirl it all up and put it in a little tin that they put through a mass spec. There's your Halloween tie-in, human cotton candy. That's what it looks like. So did I study prehistoric? Yes and no. So I didn't really study it because I got my master's in Nevada. So I focused like a lot of my prehistoric stuff on Nevada tribes. But when I worked as an archaeologist here, I worked with a lot of tribes. So the cool thing about contract archaeology is you don't pick and choose. So I've worked historic, I've worked forensics, I've worked prehistoric, I've worked with a lot of cool native monitors. So yeah, a little bit of everything. It's really nice. Do I ever find animals' teeth more than humans? Yes. I don't, but I work with people who do. So a lot of it's the same idea. We could do a lot of the same stuff. One of the women I work with studies dogs to look at how humans use dogs for hunting in prehistory. And it's really cool. But when I am on work as a archaeologist in the real world, I mostly get called because they find animal bones and they're freaking out because they think they found a person. And I'm like, look how big that femur is. It's so big. What are you doing? It's a sheep. Okay, what drew me to being an archaeologist? So I read the book Timeline as a kid, and that's like how I learned about it. And I really liked it. I love history too, so I feel like it's just applying history, which is really interesting. And to be honest, I kind of like that I can wear flannel a lot, and that's considered professional clothes. No archaeologist dresses like this. I like being outside. I like a ton of it, yeah. So if you're into all of that, definitely be an archaeologist. Do a field school. They cost a lot of money, but they're worth it. And they'll tell you if you like it before you like dive into a whole degree. Yeah, go for it. In my opinion, would I say forensics is challenging? Yes. So it is challenging both in the fact that dealing with the legal system is a lot, and I don't have a ton of forensic casework under my belt, but enough. And it's also challenging because I think it is very easy for me to compartmentalize historic death, and dealing with modern death is a lot. So like after I worked up in Paradise and I recovered a bunch of people up there, I went home and laid on the couch, and my husband brought me In and Out, and I watched Great British Bake Off for like a day, and I felt better. But I mean, I was able to help in the only way I know how to, and that's how to be an archaeologist. And I think when you look at it, that we provided closure and we provided remains, something so those people could bury or cremate or have, that helps with the more emotional side. But the legal side, I mean, I don't do a lot of that. They just call me in and I dig, which is kind of nice. Oh, I love this. Okay, what was the use of like third molars, so your wisdom teeth? So wisdom teeth definitely have a use. The reason we remove them so much, for two reasons. One is because over time we have changed our diet, so we eat softer food, we eat cooked food, and teeth don't change as quickly as bone does. So like if you work out a lot, there's a thing called Wolff's Law, so you have to you have to break down muscle to build up muscle. That's why you feel sore. Same with bone. So if we're not chewing really hard food and using all of those muscles, our bone gets smaller, and then there's no room for third molars. So then people who have third molars and small bones, they get impacted, they get infected, those people die, they don't have kids. Evolutionarily over time, we see less third molars. The other thing is, and this is my personal opinion in my little soapbox, it's because in America, dental school costs hundreds and thousands of dollars, and they can tell you to take your third molars out and pay off their student loans. If you don't need them, don't get them out. Don't do it. I have very small bones. I got them out at 12. Yeah, but my advisor, he has his, and he's like emphatic about keeping them. A lot of the professors at UC Davis have them because they're European. Yeah, they don't take them out that much in Europe because school doesn't cost $600,000, and I'm not joking. That's how much dental school costs. Yeah, that's also why you don't find a whole soapbox. I won't go on it. Okay, I have a whole. Come see me after you want to hear about the problems with dental health in America.
Okay, so please give a round of applause once again for Diana. We hope you've enjoyed Anthro Stories. As I mentioned, it will be on our YouTube channel and CRC's YouTube channel for folks to be able to look at again. And if you are really interested in archaeology, I do want to make a plug for our archaeology lab that we hold here at CRC. Myself and Professor Paskey and also Professor Evoy also has been involved with looking at a historical collection of artifacts from Old Sacramento dating from the 1870s, 1880s, so same time period that Diana works in. And we do have students come and work in our lab and analyze artifacts, and it's a really great way to kind of get your feet wet if you're interested in archaeology. So you can always talk to me about that or talk to your other anthro professors to get info. We will be taking students this spring to work in our lab, so if you're interested, let me know. And thanks again. Thank you, Diana, and have a good day, everyone.